travel far, my little Callao, but we will never leave you, even in the face of our death. You will make my strength your own. You will see my life through your eyes, as your life will be seen through mine. The son becomes the father, and the father the son.
I can know your pain, but I couldn't get used to it. As another bird is gone, it's like 7 years alone. I just couldn't get used to it.
Noticias CNN en vivo desde Washington, Frank Jacobs.
Nos han informado que el vuelo inaugural del transbordador Génesis está pasando por una grave emergencia.
Un problema en el lanzamiento del transbordador Génesis. Los reportes aseguran que no se pudo desacoplar, enviando a ambas naves disparadas al espacio.
Y ahora iremos a Cabo Cañaveral para saber más de esta historia.
Jim, todo lo que sabemos es que los seguros de liberación del 777 fallaron y no liberaron la nave. Ignoramos
hay que hacer...
La ignición continuó y las turbinas se encendieron. Se especula que el apagón se originó por una falla.
Ignición de turbinas en menos 15 segundos.
Houston, requerimos ayuda. Houston.
Intento diagnosticar.
¿Qué rayos es eso?
Es un objeto no identificado llegando por el sureste.
Afirmativo.
Y se acerca muy rápido. ¿Están todos bien? ¿Estás bien? Bueno, solo espero que esta experiencia no evite que vuelen en el futuro. Estadísticamente, es la forma más segura de viajar.
Superman.
So far, with all of these discussions on the Superman movies, we've been at a slight disadvantage because only one of us can remember distinctly seeing them in theatres. For the rest of us, it's down to hazy, nostalgic memories, that lovely thing which makes 80s movies hold a particular charm. And we can laugh at the bad moments of Superman 3 and 4, but overall, we still love and cherish them. With 2006's Superman Returns, the game has changed. Now we are old. We are jaded. We have adult expectations of what we want a Superman movie to be. Never mind a Superman movie we'd waited 19 years for. It's the one film where we can all vividly remember how we felt when we first saw it, and put some distance between that and how we feel looking at it today, and whether anything's changed. And most importantly, if you've watched or listened to our conversations on the other films, we were pretty much agreeing with each other on how we felt. Something tells me that's not going to be the case this time around. But that is the gift of Superman Returns, in my opinion. It inspires passionate debate. It's 7 years later, and I'm still not bored about talking about it. However flawed you can argue it is also one of the most interesting, divisive, and ballsy films in the comic book movie genre. And I think cinema is richer for having it. And best of all, we have two people here tonight to talk about it whose lives were separately linked to the film during its production. So I'm going to start first with special guest of honour, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett. For the good folks who don't know, what was your involvement with Superman Returns? And if you can detach yourself from that experience, what were your initial thoughts on the finished film, just as a fan?
I was tapped by Bryan Singer to be his videographer, to follow him around. I had previously produced three DVD special editions for him. I'd done The Usual Suspects, I had done X-Men 1.5 and X2. Now, on Usual Suspects and X-Men 1.5, I had done them after the fact, but on X2, I had gone up to the Vancouver set on numerous occasions and done interviews and shot footage and things like that. But this time, because of what Bryan had seen on the Lord of the Rings films, on those DVDs, Bryan wanted me there 100% of the time. Like, literally every day, all day, on set, me. I wanted to have employees of mine be there, but Bryan finally said, no, Bob, you have to be there. And I said, okay, assuming we can work out a deal and all that. It was, I was going to end up spending a year of my life, and I was going to be on set every day and document everything that went on in the production of the film, from the beginning of principal photography to the end of principal photography. And actually, I started on the film 6 months before principal photography even began. I started shooting in August of 2004. And I didn't really officially start on the film until March 2005. But I started shooting some of Guy Dias's work when he was on the initial production design phase of the project. And then probably the most interesting thing that happened in this early phase was I was also working on Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So I was going back and forth a lot from New Zealand, and I just happened to be in L.A., and Bryan calls me up and says, I want you to come to Warner Brothers tomorrow and bring a camera. And I said, well, why? And he said, I'm not going to tell you why. Just show up there and be at the studio at 9 a.m. So I go to the studio and find the sound stage that they're on, and I notice there's these gigantic Panavision cameras. They're shooting 65 millimeter film, which is not something you normally do. And I saw Mike and Dan, Mike Doherty and Dan Harris. I was like, guys, what's going on? Why am I here? And they're like, we're screen testing. And I'm like, you're screen testing who? We're screen testing Superman. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, we're going to, and I figured, is there going to be a parade of actors? And they're like, no, we're screening one guy. And we're shooting, and we're going to screen test one guy for the studio. They haven't seen him yet. We're shooting it in 65 millimeter. And we're going to shoot him both as Clark Kent and as Superman. And he's going to be acting, this is interesting, opposite Kerry Russell, who's playing Lois Lane. And that day, which you can actually see in the documentary Requiem for Krypton, I videotaped Brandon Routh getting his Brandon Routh was getting his hair cut, and Brandon had long hair. He looked like the mid-90s Superman with the long shoulder-length hair. So I videotaped him getting his hair cut, which is pretty cool, and then trying on various horn-rimmed glasses for Clark Kent. Now, he was a little thinner then. He hadn't bulked up, but you could see he definitely was Clark Kent. And then he ran his scenes with Kerry Russell, some of which wound up in the finished film, and I videotaped it all. And that began an odyssey that lasted 2 years for me. I was in and out of the edit bay. John Ottman was in Australia editing the film along with Elliot Graham. And I would go into the edit bay with Brian, almost every day. And I watched things come together, and I was shooting all the previous. Now, the first time I saw the finished film, it was a very different movie than the version that we saw. It was about a half an hour longer, and it was at what was called a friends and family screening. Brian usually doesn't test screen his movies. He didn't back then. And this film was a 3-hour-long cut of the movie that opened with the Return to Krypton sequence. And in the first 20 minutes of the film, there was no dialogue. A lot of the younger audience, who was unfamiliar with the Richard Donner films, did not understand the whole opening of the film. Didn't get, where are they? What is this giant circular cracked dome? We don't get it. And the first 20 minutes of the film were it was almost like a tone poem in a way. All of us that are on this podcast, would have loved it. I loved it. I love what I was seeing. And the film, I think, was a much richer, fuller experience. And I really liked the movie a lot. I thought it was really emotional. I thought it worked. I thought what Brian was going for, examining an area in Superman's life we've never really seen before, and certainly not on film, I thought he pulled it off. I thought it was terrific. But then it became apparent that the film they wanted to take a half an hour out of it, and they needed to make it more accessible for the younger audience that wasn't familiar with the Donner movies, that didn't, might not have known Superman and Superman 2. So my feelings upon finding all this out, and then the final release version, by not seeing where Superman came from, where he's returning from, not feeling the resonance of the fact that Superman's returning, but from where? When he sees Krypton as a graveyard, and that scene now exists, much to Brian's chagrin, by the way. He did not want it to be on the new release of Superman Returns. You can see the Return to Krypton sequence, but it was never finished. John Ottman never scored it, and I think it probably could have used a couple more visual effects cutaways to explain that he's in the valley of the Kryptonian houses, the houses of Krypton, so you saw other than the Superman logo, so it made more sense. But I still like the movie. I think the great weakness of the film is Lex Luthor's plot doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What does he intend to do with this new, very inhospitable Kryptonian continent that he's building? Why is he doing this? I mean, what is he hoping to achieve? I get it. Like, in the first film, his plot, he's going to nuke California, half of it's going to fall into the sea, and there's a whole new western seaboard that he will own. I get that. But who's going to want to live on his new Kryptonian continent? I think that was a little weak. Superman Returns it's an example of when studios are trying to appease their audience, and at the same time trying to fulfill a filmmaker's vision. And Brian is very much, a studio filmmaker the same way that Ridley Scott is, although I think that the original version of Superman Returns that I saw at that Friends and Family screening was a better version than what came out in theaters. And I have over the years, prodded Brian to do a director's cut.
Well,
So if that answers your question.
it certainly does, and I'd be right there prodding with you. Now, the same question goes to our other esteemed guest, Mr. Justin Korthoff. What was your, for the time, I think we can say, unique involvement with Superman Returns, and your initial thoughts when you finally saw it?
I was getting involved in the superhero hype message boards back in the day when Superman was actually still kind of in development hell. Brian hadn't been announced, McG was on the project, and the boards were just a mess of people going, oh my god, Warner Brothers hates us, they're going to ruin everything that's good about Superman. And I'm very much of the opinion that the worst way to get someone to listen to you is to call them stupid. And so we started this thread at the hype. It was actually started by someone else named Paradoxium. And he made a trailer. He did a mashup trailer, and I was like, this is it. This is what we need to do. And so I encourage people to start making their own trailers of this is what we want to see from Superman. And eventually that rolled out into starting BlueTights.net, which was a site where the marching orders were sort of, okay, quit your bitching. This is us telling Warner Brothers what we like about Superman and what we want from a Superman film and what we want to feel like with a Superman film. And so it was a very positive spin on a fan site. Instead of complaining about everything they were doing, we were trying to offer a helping hand. And I put an open letter on my site that basically said, look, Warner, we know that, you allow us to do this stuff. It's a privilege, not a right. And we would like to work with you should you ever want to work with a fan site. And if you do, here's my contact info. And that letter sat up there. This all happened in early 2004, I guess. And while we were running this site, Brian was announced, Brandon was announced. And then one day in, I think, January, I got a phone call, and I pick up my phone. I didn't know the number. And the guy says, hey, this is John so-and-so. I work with Warner Brothers. We saw your letter. And I about crapped my pants. I was like, holy crap, this is happening. And he explained to me kind of what Rob was just saying. He says to me, well, actually, he didn't even say much. First he said, we want to talk to you. Can you come down to L.A.? So I was like, okay, cool. So I drove down to L.A. I was living 4 hours north of L.A. at the time. Drove down to L.A., and I met with John from Warner Brothers Marketing, I met with his boss, and I met with Chris Lee, the executive producer of Superman Returns. And we sat in a room and talked for a while, and Chris basically said, look, Brian is doing he's filming these behind-the-scenes video journals. That was actually the first time they name-dropped Rob as well. I knew he was working on them. And they said, we're doing these video journals, we're putting them together, we want to do them through a fan site. That already exists. We don't want to create something. We want to go through a fan site that already exists, and we like the tone of your site. We like the tone of your community. We like the way things are handled there. We'd like to do this through you. And like Rob said, they helped out with hosting and stuff, just because, once they got involved, there was no way I could afford hosting. I was paying for my own server and everything up to that point. So then, I got about 3 hours home. On my drive home, about 3.5 hours, and I got another phone call, and they said, hey, Bryan Singer wants to have dinner. Can you have dinner? And I was like, yeah, turning around now. And they were like, well, no. If you're already home, just come back tomorrow and we'll have lunch. So the next day I went back down to L.A. It was all a very surreal experience for a fan to suddenly be in the middle of all this stuff. And they basically kind of reiterated, like, we want to do these video journals, and we want to do them through your site. And are you interested? And I was like, well, yeah. And so a couple months later, I guess it was, we managed to keep it quiet. Literally, none of this leaked or any information got out until literally the night before they launched. And then the night before, things started circulating around. But then the next day, Hello from Sydney went up, and it was a shock to everyone. And the new Blue Tights design went up. The first time I saw it was at a screening 2 or 3 weeks before it came out. My initial thoughts were like, holy shit, this is the Superman film I wanted, because there were some specific things that I like. I'm a big fan of the Fleischer cartoons, and this film feels like a live-action Fleischer cartoon in a lot of ways. My very next thought was, oh my god, people are going to lose their minds over the kid. In fact, I got on the phone, Mike Doherty called me as soon as the screening was over, and he's like, okay, what? And we had an hour-long conversation about this kid and how people were going to go crazy about it, and not necessarily in a good way. Because when the rumors had come out, people were freaking out about it. I was like, you guys are going to get reamed for this. I liked it personally, but I was terrified for what the response was going to be. It was a case of, I was really happy they finally tried something new with the character, but I knew that even though people said they want new, they didn't really want new.
Right.
And so I was this weird mix of like, oh my god, I really love what you guys did here. I can't wait to see where it goes next. And oh my god, you guys are not going to get another chance. You're going to get totally just torn apart here. So it was a very weird mix the first time I saw it. There's a lot that I still, I watched it again to prep for this podcast, and there's a lot that I really, really, really still enjoy about the film. I don't think it quite holds up as well as I would like it to. I see the problems more that are in it, but overall I still actually really enjoyed watching it.
Well, now we swing around to the opinion of regular Joe Public. That's us, folks. We had nothing to do with the film. We were just sat staring at a calendar from 1987 to June 30th, 2006, waiting for this film to come out. So first of all, Mr. Randall Maynard, tell us exactly how you felt the first time you saw Superman Returns, sir.
I could not have the more opposite experience of our other two guests, because I was an average 22-year-old at the time, and I heard about an advanced screening going on out in Burbank, so I waited in line for 3 hours to see this movie because I was so pumped about seeing this new take on Superman, and I saw the trailers and stuff, and I was just really, like, the cast is amazing, and the production values look great and everything, and I was so pumped about this, and thought it was going to be great, and, I have a theory about, like, really weird movies where, like, especially sequels, like, if they're gonna be bad, or if they're gonna be unsatisfying, I should say, personally, in the first 10 minutes you'll get this sinking gut feeling like, oh god, like this is not going where I want it to go, this is not happening. And I got it in the first 5 seconds of the movie because a little card came up to explain the movie. just words on the screen were like, hey, Superman left because of reasons.
By the way, that card was not there.
I know that now. I'm just saying, like, I can only tell you my own, experience. I didn't know anything about any edits or what was originally supposed to happen in the movie. I could only take the movie at face value. And then we go into the title sequence, which was interesting, but it still felt a little rushed and kind of off in its own strange way. And from there kind of was, to me, a little bit of a disjointed experience that was very dark and moody, and twists and turns with this movie that I just don't feel were anything that anyone was really looking forward to here. Like, I don't think they were delivering on any sort of promise. It was its own unique creature, and on a visceral level, I didn't find it very appealing, and as a fan, I certainly found very little about it that was satisfying.
I'm hugging you, Randall. It's okay. It's all right. It's all right.
Thank you, Phil.
So, Jamie, we've talked about this before, sir, but I never get tired of hearing it, and we hadn't met until a year after, well, that's even a year and a half after this movie came out. So, when you first saw it, I take it was June 30th you saw it, or maybe even before that, I don't know. What were your initial thoughts?
It was June 27th, because they moved the release date up to June 28th.
Oh, right.
Remember?
Right.
So I saw it with my best friend at midnight. This is the movie that got me back into the character, because we all had little bits of our time where we're too cool for Superman, and the whole hype, the whole hoopla of Bryan Singer's going to bring him back, and everything looked great, and I remember really loving, like, just couldn't believe, like, how much that first look of Brandon looked like the Fleischer suit and all that stuff, and so I was certainly expecting a different movie, but I appreciated what Singer was going for. And, they always say that as long as I meet one person, I know one person really loved it, then it was worth all that work. And I will tell Singer right now, you made that movie for me. Because I was emotionally in that place where Superman was, in a relationship where I had heard someone say they never loved me. And she did love me. And I thought, this movie's about me and her. And, so, with Usual Suspects, I bow to Bryan Singer. And X2, I high-five him, but I firmly shake his hand for Superman Returns.
I have a confession to make, which I've never told anyone before. Certainly not Jamie. First time I saw Superman Returns, I hated it. Not that I went in with unrealistic expectations. At the point that I saw it, it had actually been out for 2 weeks in the States, and people seemed to be, as you'd expect, split on it violently. You either loved it or you hated it. And I assumed that the people who hated it were expecting something more in tune with modern Superman comics and mythology, and they couldn't stand the reverence to Donner's film, which obviously was steeped in the source material from pre-1978 comics. And because Superman the movie is my favourite film, I thought I'd be okay. And I was wrong. I found the reverence to Donner's film wasn't homage. It was just flat out copying scenes and stealing lines to the point that it was distracting. And I was utterly taken aback by the new elements that Singer brought to it, because it just wasn't what I was expecting at all. I'm not talking about Jason specifically. I'm talking about really this seemingly half-hour stretch of the film in which Lois and Jason, his son, get kidnapped on Lex Luthor's boat while Lex launches some missiles and shaves some crystals into chunks and then sinks the boat, and James Marsden comes to rescue them. A huge chunk that contains neither Clark nor Superman. And then the week later, I saw it again, this time in the IMAX 3D version. First time I ever saw an IMAX movie, by the way, and now I'm a complete IMAX junkie. And I flushed away all my preconceptions and my gripes, and I just accepted it for what it was. I think we all needed to do that. And this time I was able to focus on what the film was attempting to be about, what it succeeded in doing, and I accepted it. I do think that it has some criminal flaws, but what I like, I've really learnt to like. It's a very earnest movie with a lot of charm and a lot of melancholy, and I am a sucker for things like that. And certainly it is the unique vision of one filmmaker. We can safely say nobody else but Bryan Singer would have made a Superman movie like this. And that's been my opinion ever since. But I think that's the question to pose to you guys, and it's a question that either kills or strengthens the film going in. Getting back to what I was saying at the start, as a child watching like Superman 4 on basic cable, you accept it for what it is. You don't have preconceptions about what a Superman movie should be. You're an innocent child, but we've waited this long, we have a pretty firm idea of what we want. So the question goes to everybody, and I don't know who wants to start, but what did you personally want from a Superman movie at that point? How close or far away was Superman Returns from that? And was that a good or a bad thing? Jamie?
It was absolutely not what I expected it to be, and I loved it for it. If a filmmaker surprises you, if he gives you everything that you expect up front, then where is the surprise in that? And I think the problem is a lot of people expected it to be X2. People forget that Singer had to reintroduce the character with a reintroductory story, and he chose to go the route of saying, I'm not going to reboot the character because I think the Donner version of the origin is too definitive. He did it too damn well in order for me just to remake it, and I respect that. But you still have to reintroduce the character, and it's a very contemporary, very deeply religious and spiritual look at if a Superman was real. I didn't expect any of that, and I was deeply moved by it. So I was was not what I expected, but I say that in the best way possible.
Justin?
My greatest fear when this movie was starting to happen was that we were going to get a hyper-modernized... I mean, McG kind of said it all. In the end, actually, right before Bryan came on board, I was convinced McG actually could make a good Superman film. I'd done a lot of digging on it, but in the general time that McG was on the movie, I thought we were going to get a Charlie's Angels. I thought we were going to get Neo, and I thought we were going to get hyper crazy camera action and shitty one-liners and just a lot of like cool modern action movie stuff. And I mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of the Fleischer cartoons, and I so desperately wanted something that harkened back to that old Art Deco Superman. So when everything started coming out for it, and we saw the picture of Superman in essentially the Fleischer suit in front of an Art Deco Daily Planet, I was giddy. My expectations were met, but I also got my first run-in with realizing that, a whole lot of people actually want that hyper-modern Superman. and they're pissed off about this. So I expected, in terms of expectations, the film was coming together the way I expected, or at least hoped for, but my expectations about people's reactions were definitely not met. I expected something that a lot of people would get behind and really love, and that wasn't what I got, which was kind of weird.
To be fair to Singer, I don't think this is what fans wanted, and there's a reason for that. I think taking on a modern Superman project is an extremely daunting task, and I don't want to take that away from anyone who takes on the project here. But I'm just saying, going into it, when you have fans that have been waiting for like 2 generations, like it's so much has been built up over time. People are expecting a movie that studios haven't even dared to really do yet. They want something from this character that's going to kind of change the genre a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And fans want things like villains and big set pieces, and they want to see the mythology brought to life. And to make things worse, for the studios and the filmmakers, the comics since the last set of movies, since the Donner movies, the comics had changed so much and taken the character to like new levels. In the animated series, had like reintroduced characters and elements that suddenly made characters who were really archaic and outdated they really now seem like viable options on film. And then we'd had all these other promises of like, think what you will of Tim Burton and Kevin Smith's take on these characters, but they all promised big action and big concepts and little parts of the myth that we'd seen in modern retellings that fans want to see again. So expectations are impossibly high, and they're divergent. They're all over the map. So much has happened with this character since the 80s or the mid 80s. So there's no single definitive version of the character anymore, like there was back when Donner did his version. And so to honor that is almost impossible. And you need a team of creative people to put something like this together. And Singer was focused on making this an extension of the Donner films, and I think a lot of people had moved on from that at this point. They're great and they had their time, and I love them personally. But there was this promise for something bigger and better, and something that was going to push for something that was just newer. And instead, we got something that I think was just a little too close to what we'd seen before, and just didn't meet modern expectations.
We don't know what we want. None of us do, and I think we'll come back to this many, many times. With Superman more than any, this is the one character that draws passionate responses from people and exactly what they want from this character, but everybody's got a different idea. There's no consensus. It is impossible to make a Superman movie that's going to please everybody. I might say something differently after I've seen Man of Steel, I don't know, but the way it stands right now, that is the case. And I know that because I'm looking deep in the bowels of my soul and how I felt at the time. Obviously, being Superman the movie is my favourite movie, he says he's going to follow that continuity, that mythology, make a sequel out of that. Absolutely, I am there. You talk to people who love, modern Superman stories and might have wanted the McG version. I still think you ask them what do they think of that original Christopher Reeve, Richard Donner movie, they'd say, oh, fantastic, I love that movie. Right, so you want another one like that? Fuck no! It's crazy how you talk to these people. It doesn't make sense. And, just for an example, I only had one expectation going in to this movie about how the story was going to play. I understood that it was going to be a movie that had the tone and the story structure of Superman the movie. I got that. I saw that immediately. But what I did expect, for some reason, is that the Lex Luthor of this movie would be the billionaire, would be the tycoon version. It just made sense to me. Okay, Superman's been away from Earth for many, many years. So he's been away from Earth long enough that his ultimate nemesis would have managed to build a legitimate business empire in Metropolis and become extremely powerful. What better example is there for Superman that things have moved on and the place that he left is not the same place anymore, that things have completely changed, then his ultimate nemesis is now legitimate, powerful, owns half of Metropolis, and is in some ways his own Superman to the people of Metropolis. That was just a no-brainer to me. It just seemed like such a logical way to go, and it required so little explanation because you've had that great 5 years later plot device, and they didn't do it. And I'll always feel like that was a missed opportunity, but at the same time, look, we're dealing with a filmmaker who is not influenced by, comics post-Byrne. He's influenced by one film, and so for Singer, Lex Luthor is still the greatest criminal mastermind on Earth, but he's a criminal. So, I let it go. I mean, obviously we'll get to Lex properly in just a little bit, but, Robert, you have...
Yes, well, Phil, can I also add, real quick, to add to what you're saying, all this stuff, when they were saying, like, the little increments that Brian and Robert and obviously Justin would give out, everyone was giddy. They could not contain themselves. They loved this idea so much of, not rebooting the franchise and just, carrying on for where Superman 2 left off. You can say you want about it, you never liked the idea. At the time, nobody batted an eye. It was considered the most genius idea possible.
Well, who though? The forums, there were absolutely people in the communities that were like, whoa, this is a terrible idea. But everybody I talked to, and Rob can probably speak to this more, everybody I talked to internally loved the idea.
See, here's the thing. And I'm not going to blame on Mike and Dan, because Mike and Dan, I thought, wrote a great X-Men movie. Mike and Dan were guys in their mid-20s. They were really young. And they were dealing with very heavy personal issues. And, I mean, the idea that Superman is coming back to a world that has moved on and no longer needs him. And the idea, the relationship with Lois, I just think that Mike and Dan were a little out of their depth as far as writers go. That you needed somebody who was a little bit more seasoned and who'd lived a little bit more life. Like a screenwriter who was not in their 20s, a screenwriter that was not in their 30s, but a screenwriter that was in their 40s and their 50s, because the issues that Superman was dealing with, and indeed Superman Returns was dealing with, were very heady, decidedly not comic book issues that you normally, and when I say that, the interior lives of comic book characters, yes, have been dealt with before, but not to the extent that Superman Returns wanted to deal with them. I mean, a lot of people are like, look, you're dealing with domestic drama, and Superman takes Lois Lane flying, unfortunately, in Superman Returns, it harks back too much to the scene in Donner's original Superman. We needed to see more of that. I mean, there was a lot, the best part of that movie was the tension between Lois Lane, saying, you left me, you didn't say goodbye, and Superman saying, I hear people crying out for a savior all the time, and those are the kind of things that were at the heart of the movie that Brian was trying to make. Those are decidedly not action-adventure ideas. Or you can deal with those in an action-adventure concept, but that's not what they were doing. And I think that the very concept of what Brian wanted to do with the movie was sort of at odds with the idea of what fans wanted to see out of a Superman film. We want to deal with Superman. Yes, I hear everyone crying out for a savior, and then you want to see him go kick ass. I mean, Superman is in orbit above the Earth, and he's hearing a cacophony of voices of all the things that are going on the planet Earth at any one time. Superman hears a bank robbery in Metropolis. He doesn't go stop like the genocide in Darfur, or he doesn't go where there's an uprising in a say, Eastern European country. Mm-hmm. I mean, the problem with the film was you needed a much grander scope, and you needed, I think, a much more mature writing ability, and it worked great for X2. But, I mean, come on. Superman goes and stops a bank robbery when he's talking about hearing the voices of all humanity crying out for a savior. If that's going to happen, let's see an action sequence where Superman actually stops a fleet of, say, tanks going from one African country into another. And he actually puts his foot down and stops a civil war. Let's see something on a global scale that matters, that truly deals with what the world thinks of Superman, not just what one woman and one copy editor and one, editor-in-chief of a metropolitan newspaper think about. And I thought that the scope and vision of Superman Returns was what was its major undoing.
What's weird about that is, going back to the script, is that when you really boil down the concept of the movie, it's about, if you took away the Superman elements, you're talking about an alien who has a kid out of wedlock and is kind of peripherally dealing with those issues while casually fighting crime, and these things all don't really amount to much in the story. There's a lot of setup and there's not a great deal of follow through, and there to be fair, like in the third act, we get resolution, but it's not necessarily cathartic because it's still leaving things wide open for this sequel that never happened. And I just think, like you were saying, the ideas being at odds with each other. We're not seeing like a cohesion between this drama of the mistakes this character has made versus his place in finding his place in the world and all this stuff. Like I don't feel like these things are coming together to make a really good genre movie. It feels like the whole time we're just being ripped in different directions.
I agree, and I think Brian knew that when he was making the film. I mean, I know that there was a time when Kitty, Brian was like, "What is her function in this script? What is she supposed to do?" And ultimately, they finally, and late into the production, they came up with the idea that it throws the crystals out of the helicopter when they're leaving New Krypton, and that was her function, is that she takes away Luthor's ability to wield Kryptonian power. But again, that was a late addition, and I think that the idea that why did they have to have a Mocker? I mean, why did they need those things? Why did they need a group of new Otises? To be fair, I mean, I think James Marsden is terrific in the movie as Richard. There's a scene in the kitchen between him and Lois where he asks her, "Did you love him?" And it's shattering. I mean, his performance is tremendous.
Well, see, that's where I think I have to defend Dan and Mike. And I mean, you weren't going off on them, but you think about this, they were only like 25. I mean, they were young when they got assigned this movie. And that scene was amazing to me because I was like, when you talk about that, Robert, because it's like 25-year-olds wrote this scene.
That was the crux of the movie right there. I think they did a great job writing these individual scenes. And the fact that scene, that domestic drama that was playing out, needed to play out on a global scale somehow, and that was the core of the film. But how do you then make that count on a global level?
Right, like we're not seeing like that plot and that story echo through the action of the movie, and seeing like how all of this stuff is amounting to like this big climax where all this stuff is, I say resolved, and I don't mean like, airtight, like contained. I just mean like, what does this all mean? Like, where is this going? And instead it's a lot of ideas, but not a great deal of follow through.
Obviously, removing the elements, the fresh elements that were brought to the story, and what the movie is really about, and we're going to get to it, and it is one of the movie's strengths, I think. But talking about the elements that Singer took from the Donnerverse, I have to ask a very harsh question, but I do think it's a legitimate one. Is Superman Returns just a loving homage, or is it the most self-indulgent comic book movie ever made? Now, personally, just to throw in my 2 cents, I don't think it's too self-indulgent. I just think it comes damn close. I definitely think there are a few instances when the film, rather than coming up with its own dialogue or its own moments, it's taking lines and it's taking moments from the first movie, and I hate wink stuff like that. You know, I've brought other movies over the coals for that kind of thing. I'm not gonna make Superman not accountable. It's very wink. I mean, I think that's about it. I do feel like, and I'm sure Robert has a perspective on this, most of the indulgences were cut to a bare minimum in the final cut. I agree with Robert that the 3-hour version would have been really interesting and it might have played better, but having seen the deleted scenes, I do see a lot of Smallville stuff in there particularly, which doesn't seem necessary, which just seems to be not going anywhere. Like, I remember one scene, I think it's like at least a minute long, where we're just looking at old pictures on Clark's window frame or something of past moments from the original movies, and we can see Glenn Ford in the photo frame. And, you know, let's not forget, the comic book movie genre, although there have been tons of movies, it is still rather young and limited. So, it's not just that Superman Returns is homage to a comic book movie. As far as I'm concerned, it's the only homage. There's no other movie like this. When other comic book movies, which, you know, have had previous movies, when they've had previous incarnations, when they start up again, they always go the opposite way. They reboot. They try and get as far away from what was previously done as possible. I mean, this would be like if, as an example, if in Batman Begins, Chris Nolan was so in love with the actors who played Bruce's parents in the 89 movie that he CG'd them in to the origin sequence of that. That's kind of what it's like bringing Brando into this. That's kind of harsh, but that's the only thing I could compare it to, really. But there's nothing you can compare it to.
Little lines here and there, like when Luther's at the Fortress of Solitude and Kitty goes, "It's you act like you've been here before." That didn't bother me when I first saw the movie, but when I saw it again, it was kind of like, that didn't need to be there. Little things like that. But I think of it two ways. A couple of us here are huge James Bond nuts, and I think of it kind of like Brian doing sort of like a James Bond film. There's certain moments that you all have to have in a Superman movie, and I felt Brian was basically being faithful to that. That didn't really bother me. I think that was perfectly fine. Really, what I think of it at the end of the day in terms of the homaging, though, it's very simple. The first 30 minutes is a Richard Donner movie. And there's a certain point, we talked about the scene earlier, is the scene at home. It turns into a Bryan Singer movie, and it never lets go. It completely segues into that. And you can not like it or whatever, but this idea that, Brian spent 2.5 hours slobbering over Donner, that's bullshit. Like, he completely changed. Did you ever see that in a Donner movie? It lets go of the fun kid stuff and becomes a serious movie at that point.
I don't think there's any real Donner stuff in here. I don't think he quite is hitting the right, even in what you're calling the Donner section, I don't think he's hitting the right tone of the Donner stuff. Like, Donner knew how to kind of set up the world and create an environment that was understandable, and here we're seeing, I don't quite understand the world that they inhabit.
Maybe what I meant is the fun. Maybe that's what I meant.
It's just fiction. It just feels like a cartoon world. Like, I can't quite figure out what this world is really. And like Rob was mentioning earlier, the scope and stuff is off, so I can't tell, like, I mean, they kind of just hand wave all the details, and we're just not quite sure what's happening here. But to get back on point, what I find interesting about this movie is that a lot of the missteps in the movie are the same as that we saw in the same stuff, the same problems that we saw in Quest for Peace are coming back up in this movie. And we've got the reintroduction of all these familiar settings and characters which are calling back to the first movie, which they did a lot in Quest. And then we've got this deconstructionist central idea, which again they try in Quest and doesn't work. And then scenes that are just outright lifted, or lines of dialogue and all these things calling back to Donner, which don't capture the Donner spirit at all, but are just, frankly, just calling back to it, for the sake of doing so, to kind of anchor it to the original movie. And what's even stranger is that when this movie came out in the age of, DVDs and TiVo and YouTube and stuff like that, there's no reason to do something ad nauseum this way. I mean, we all remember it. We can go reference it. It felt like it wasn't really appealing to like a savvy modern audience. We're kind of just lazily, slathering elements from the original movie in here, and I felt like it was very self-indulgent, because we're seeing someone who really likes these things just recreate moments that they like, and it's not to the audience's enjoyment, it's just to their own whatever interest they had here, even if it's out of love or admiration. This isn't for the audience. This feels like it's for the filmmaker.
The original Smallville sequence happened, Superman had just found out he truly was alone in the universe. And he crashes back to Earth. And the way it was originally structured, and I hate to say it because the way it was originally structured was also the way it was shot, and it was the movie that Brian was directing. But when Superman lands and finds out that Lois Lane has written this article, Why the World Doesn't Need a Superman, and that Martha Kent has a boyfriend, the James Karen character, when Superman comes back, his home is no longer his home either. He's truly a man without a country and a man without a home. And everything is different. And when he says, maybe I'll just stay here on the farm, and it was a much more emotionally moving sequence, and you see how a mother relates to a son, which is later how Lois Lane is going to relate to her son. And there was a lot more that was resonant as far as Superman's character goes in those early Smallville sequences, that from the original version of the movie with those deleted scenes. I mean, look, if they had been left in the movie, you wouldn't have seen those lingering shots of photographs as long as they are in those deleted sequences. But there was much more going on there in terms of his character, because Superman really didn't know who he was anymore. And that was what was so great about the beginning of that movie, is we've never seen Superman question himself. Those opening sequences when he finds out that Lois is writing articles why the world doesn't need a Superman, and he's looking at all the horrors that are happening on television, and no one's mentioning, where's Superman to save us? It was a really powerful bit of business that was missing, that we've never seen before, because we've never seen Superman who is no longer needed.
I don't think it's the most self-indulgent comic book film ever made. I think that has to go to something like 300 or Sin City. It would be far more acceptable if the studio didn't spend so much time trying to tell us it had nothing to do with those films. I think that makes it feel weird to me, is because they spend all this time going, no, it's not really a sequel. Well, kind of, but no, it's not.
I hate that
And then
bullshit.
we get there and we're like, no, it absolutely is. Like, it's clearly connected to these. Like, if you released a James Bond movie and all the marketing was like, this is not James Bond, it has nothing to do with James Bond, anything you've seen before, it's none of those things, and then they had all the references in there that you expect, you'd go, well yeah, it is. No, this is, if you're saying you're not a James Bond film, you're ripping off James Bond. And that's kind of what happened here, is like, no, it's not a Donner Superman film. No, you're ripping them off. Well, no, you weren't. It was a Donner Superman film is what it really was. And so there's a weird kind of balancing act happening there.
There's two themes to talk about in Superman Returns, and from my perspective, there's the theme that really the movie doesn't hit, and there's the theme that it does hit beautifully, I think. But talking about what it doesn't hit, first of all, the way Superman Returns was sold to us was that it was a return story. A film about Superman finding his place, as you say, in a world that has been forced to move on without him, and clearly a world which could have used his help. A film that doesn't take Superman for granted as a hero, that makes him earn again our love and respect. I just don't think it delivers on that score, certainly not to the way that it could. Whether you're talking about it from a global perspective or just from the perspective of the citizens of Metropolis, he shows up, he saves the plane, everybody loves him except Lois, the end. And I think it makes the same mistake as Superman the movie, probably intentionally so, even though it didn't feel like a mistake at the time that I first saw that movie. It is, no doubt, a fantastic cheer-filled moment for us when Superman steps out of that plane and everyone around the world celebrates, and we have that very cool shot where we see Frank Langella's Perry suddenly seeing the next 5 years of newspaper headlines and just musing about that. I love that moment. And I understand, in that moment, everybody is over the moon to see Superman again. He saved all those people. He saved all those baseball players full of talent from getting smeared. I get it. But there should be an adjustment after that, surely. There's got to be resentment. There's got to be wounds. There have to be people who would say, while you were gone, my family died in whatever, and I know they'd be alive if you'd been here. It isn't even a factor. It isn't even mentioned. He doesn't have to earn anything in that regard. As Robert says, it's all done on this intimate scale. He's just got to earn, again, the love and respect of one woman. Is it too hard a question to answer in a 2.5-hour movie? that he does earn that respect back, or do we just think they missed the mark?
I mean, I think the real problem is, where's the President of the United States? Where does the United States government fall on the return of Superman? Where does the governments of the world fall? I mean, one of the things that we've seen, and you see this in Christopher Nolan's movies, like in The Dark Knight Rises, an entire American city is cut off. And you see how the American government relates to that. There's never any instance of anybody reacting other than our core group of characters. You know, you don't even get a sense of, other than the man on the street looking up and seeing Superman. There's nothing besides that little intimate group of people, you know, Richard White and their child and Lois and Lex. And I mean, even though they're trying to create this apocalyptic, the entire Eastern Seaboard is threatened, you don't get a sense that the rest of the world has anything to say about Superman coming back. You never get a sense that anyone in the rest of the world, other than, you know, a few people in a crazy game show in Japan, has anything to say about it.
Randall.
That's what's ironic about it too, is because Singer handled that really well in the first two X-Men movies, and we're not seeing any of that in this one. And I think we're seeing that Tom Mankiewicz paradox thing, where you can't really address the real world too readily, but you, at the same time, you're seeing them violate that in the first two movies, because even when like Zod shows up, you have to deal with the political ramifications of a new overlord. It just has to happen. So the Donner verisimilitude that he loves to talk about in those movies is really about how the real world functions, but it's on the filmmaker's terms. And I don't have a problem with that. I just need to know what the situation is. I need to know that we're acknowledging that the real world exists. And again, we need to appeal to a savvier audience. We have a much smaller world that we live in these days, and there are people who know a lot more, or at least peripherally aware of politics and the scope of the world. So to completely ignore that and treat it like a cartoon, like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon where we just see the same five characters over and over again, I agree, is really doing a disservice to the scale of the material, and also just the scope of the story.
I just wonder if what we thought the message of the film was always misdirection. Maybe the film was never actually about Superman winning the hearts and minds of the planet again. They were obviously trying to keep the big twist under wraps regarding Jason. That twist reveals what the soul of the piece is, and allow me to get deep and heavy and emotional on you just for a moment. There's something that we should probably not take for granted about Superman. Certainly not in the films. We're under the impression, perhaps, that because of the Fortress of Solitude and all of these Kryptonian education crystals, and he has a floating projection of his dad's head, that Kal-El has a pretty good knowledge of what Krypton was like, and what it was like to be there. Now, I would argue, if they don't show it, we don't know that. Yes, he knew about the history of his planet. Yes, in Superman the movie, he sees the surface of Krypton when he's going on the journey. Yes, he's told it was destroyed, told by a ghost, essentially, and then again told by speculative scientists that it might still be out there. And let's take the assumption that, really, Kal-El has never seen Krypton. He's never seen what it was actually like to be in his home. He's always had that disconnect. And if there was any chance that part of it still thrived, if there was even the smallest chance that he wasn't the last son of Krypton, who wouldn't go and find out? That, of course, is the beautiful irony that Superman travelled hundreds of light years to find a little piece of his home and heritage, only to realise at the end that it was on Earth all along, in the guise of the infant son that he never knew he had, the new last son of Krypton, and possibly the start of a whole new race, the real rebirth, the real new Krypton is there in Jason, nothing like the dead world that Luthor creates. I think that part of it works beautifully. You just have to accept the fact that this completely changes Superman's story forever. Randall.
Yeah, that's the weird thing though, is like, I love the way you're saying that, because it's really poetic, but the ultimate result of these plot elements don't amount to that for me. I see a character who completely avoided accountability and ceased to be a hero at all, and who's coming back trying to, in a very selfish way, try to horn his way back into the world and try to reclaim this place that he had, and you know, it's sociopathic. Like, it's really strange to me, because he's like, oh, I left to go to this planet. And I understand you're talking about his motivation to leave makes sense, but that's the irony here. It's not that someone wouldn't do that. It's not that a normal person wouldn't be curious. The irony to me is that we're talking about Superman, his character who's supposed to be exemplary. So I'm not saying he shouldn't have done it. I'm just saying it's weird to assume that we would question him doing it, because since he has to hold himself in a higher regard, and the audience does, and I'm not saying, like, you know, I'm not trying to be a fanboy here, I'm just saying, since he's this hero, this exemplary hero, this beacon of light, you do expect him to make better decisions than that. And then on top of that, having this kid and the idea that there's this ruse that Perry White's son thinks it's his kid, because his last name is White.
His nephew, yeah.
Yeah, and he thinks it's his kid, so there's this whole thing. That's never really addressed, so I guess Lois just tricks him into thinking he's the father. I'm not sure. This seems very complicated to just brush over.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. I mean, that whole thing is, you're never really clear in the movie. It seems like Richard thinks it is his kid, and Lois does, but then when he reveals himself to have superpowers, it's all of that's very murky and very nebulous. There is another character I'm very familiar with who had a certain similar situation happen to him, and of course I'm speaking about James Tiberius Kirk. And we see in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, he is also dealing with a son that he was not there for and he was never around, a son who resents him, and there's a lot more done in a lot less time in Star Trek II with the relationship between Kirk and his son. And at the end of the movie, they actually reconcile, and you realize that there's a maturity and there's something going on between the two of them, and the way they portray Kirk having a son was done in a very adult manner. You saw that there was resentment. You saw that there was they both had curiosity about one another, and it was done in a very interesting way. But in this film, in Superman Returns, you never have a moment where Lois and Superman actually address this issue. They don't actually have a conversation about, I got pregnant, I didn't tell you. You know, they needed to have a conversation about this child and the disposition of this child and what was going to happen, and how did she feel about seeing him again, and where did Richard stand, and none of that was really addressed, and you don't know what's really going on.
I just wanted to pick up something you were saying before really, really quickly, is that this whole idea of who's Jason's father and the fact that the characters seem oblivious to it, I almost do think it's worth it for that wonderful moment that Lex has. It's probably my favourite Luthor moment in the movie when, as you say, Richards and Superman are pretty clueless about what's going on. Lex figures it out in about 5 minutes. Like, he's sitting there...
5 seconds.
5 seconds. He's sitting there with Lois and the kid, and he just says, "Who's that boy's father?" It's Richards." "Are you sure?" "Okay, fine." And then a little bit later, his henchman comes up and says, "Yeah, that kid hit one of our guys with a piano." "Right, leaving!" You know, he figures it out so easily. I think it's almost worth it. I think the movie is kind of aware of that, and they're just trying to make Luthor seem smarter than everybody else, perhaps. I don't know. Jamie?
No, I actually have to go back to something Randall said about the character being selfish. That's not really a fair thing to say, because the whole idea, and I think it's pretty clear, is that he fucked up. And, you know, it's like they keep saying that he's not human, he's not human, he's not human. But he was raised as a human, and thus he inherits our traits. And one of them was that he's flawed. He's human. He isn't, you know, he made a major mistake doing that. But, I mean, you can't really call the character selfish. I mean, the first thing he does when he gets back is, I gotta get back to the job. He gets his old job back. He, you know, got right back to where he was. He's trying to find out where everything stands. He saves the plane. I mean, I don't really think that's a fair assessment to say some of those things. Like, and I love the fact that, like, he does make mistakes. and he has to own up to them.
I don't see how you could say that was clear, though. Like, when does he acknowledge that he made any sort of mistake?
I'm sorry I left you Lois.
That's it?
Well, you just asked. I mean, like, I gave you an example. I was like, well, that's it. Like, well, that's kind of it. I mean...
Right, but like, he's not taking responsibility. He's not accepting anything. He just
did. It just
around.
Okay.
And he's like, oh, sorry. No, sorry doesn't do shit.
Okay. Give you an answer, you don't like it. All right,
Justin.
It was the point about Richard that, like, they don't address it, nobody really talks about it, but it's like, if Richard thinks it's his kid, that means basically, like, right after the amnesia kiss, Lois was sleeping with Perry White's nephew. Because it would have to be really close for him to, like, legitimately think it's his kid. Or like, oh, I had the baby 3 months early, but oops, that's weird, it's fully grown. Or he's just the dumbest guy ever. Like, well, dude, it should be pretty obvious this isn't your kid. Like everything has to go down real quick, you know? Like, amnesia kiss, she goes and sleeps with Richard, he bails and leaves the planet, and everything is what it is. Or he leaves, and she gives it about a week and goes, he's never coming back, Richard, get over here. Like, because her whole thing is like, well, you were gone, we didn't know if you were coming back. Well, but how long did that last? Like, that happened quick. You didn't give me much time to come back. I mean, he was gone for 5 years, she waited a week or two in. And...
Whoa.
Well, I mean, but seriously, like, right, for this to be a legitimate misunderstanding, like, this happened fast. And so he just comes across really dumb.
Richard's the audience avatar. He's very confused, and he's waiting to see, he's just staying quiet and waiting to see if they explain anything. But I also want to add a really extra nerdy point, is that if we're going off Superman 2, if Lois is pregnant, Superman was human when she would have been pregnant, I believe. In the Lester cut,
He's human.
they don't get down when he's Kryptonian, right?
He's still Kryptonian, but he no longer has superpowers. You know, it's.
Look, guys,
I thought it was a deal where it was
gentlemen, please. He didn't wear rubber. It all comes down to that.
Well, no, that's true, but I mean,
that's true.
If you.
That's true. Do we know that?
No, they're
that's
not
true.
practicing safe sex, but that doesn't. The real question I think Randall's bringing up is he was depowered. He'd been through that machine, and he no longer had his Kryptonian abilities. So if that's the case, if indeed was his genetic structure even altered, then he shouldn't have sired a superhuman child.
That's my impression. I don't have like strict evidence. I'm just basing it off the movie. Like with the magic that they have. The science magic, the crystal magic, you know, they take away his powers. So I just assume he's human because he's weak, and there's no hope of him getting his powers back at any point.
But then he could never really be human because he wasn't born on Earth. He's humanoid, but he's not a human being.
I'm calling it movie magic there because there's no logic in that fortress. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm not using that as a criticism. Right. I'm just saying there's no scientific basis here. It's all fantasy. So I'm just assuming he's magically human now.
I learned something a long time ago about this series. Don't try and get too tied up in continuity, because you're on a hiding to nothing. I understand why we're trying to tie it into Superman 2, because it's supposed to be a sequel, and yes, Lex has been to the Fortress before, we think. But at the same time, just don't, because none of the continuity makes sense. Just for an example, something that hadn't occurred to me till I talked about it with you guys, the first movie, is that in that goodbye scene between Clark and his mother, between Mark Kent, that is clearly meant to be a final goodbye. He's never going to see her again. And yet here comes Superman Returns, completely undermining that by saying, no, she's fine. She's been getting it on with Ben Hubbard all these years, and it's absolutely fine. She shows up for no reason.
Karen is quite the ladies' man.
I agree. I wish he was in it more. So, you know, you had these elements.
So does he.
And I just want to say... Okay, fine, derail me. So I just want to say that just don't get... If you're going to get tied up in, like, did they have sex, when did they have sex, it's just going to not sap any enjoyment you can get from the movie.
You can't say that because a huge deal. The fact is that the whole existence of this child is so tied into Superman 2, and they don't do a great job of making that connection. There's too many questions. You can't bring in Superman's child and not your audience is going to be like, wait, what?
Yeah, it's the crux of like the entire movie. This kid is like a huge factor. So hand waving all those details. I'm not saying we need to do a checklist of or a timeline here in the movie. It's taken for granted as if we can just piece together all of this stuff, and I don't think it's that clear. Especially for imagine a whole new generation of people. This is very confusing.
Well, that's me told. Shall we take a short break?
Yeah, I mean, it was, that whole thing was, I mean, we went to Tamworth, which is Australia's country music capital, to shoot the Smallville stuff. We were there for almost a month. I met a guy, I was sitting next to a guy, at night. We would always go to the hotel. They call them hotels. They weren't really hotels, but they were pubs. And I was sitting next to a guy drinking, just talking, and finally I said, so what do you do? He goes, I don't do anything. And I said, well, why? And he said, oh, I just got out of prison. And I said, oh, really? What do you mean you just got out of prison? He goes, no, I just got out of prison. The train stops here, and then I'm going to get another train in the morning. I go, well, how long were you in prison for? And he's like, oh, 20 years. I go, you were in prison for 20 years and you just got out tonight? And he's like, yes.
Was his name Brooks or Red by any chance?
No. But I said, what were you in prison for? He goes, I killed my best friend for fucking my wife. And I go, well, let me buy you a pint, sir.
Yeah.
And that was my experience. I mean, I had so much crazy shit happen to me in the year I was in Australia. I can't begin to tell you.
Got mugged.
I got mugged badly.
What? Oh my god.
Oh my god, that's true. Because I got a story about that, Robert. I tell you, the other day I was listening to an old podcast from the movie blog. Jamie knows what it is, and they were talking about it was before Superman Returns came out, but they were talking about all these on-set accidents that had happened.
Just in production on Superman Returns, producer Rob Burnett was mugged by 4 guys who broke his ribs, giving him a concussion and a black eye. Editor Adam Robitaille fell through a closed window and was impaled by a glass shard that punctured his lung and injured his spine.
Did he live?
I think so, yes.
Holy shit.
No, Adam Robitaille. Oh, this is the best.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes.
He was walking Mike and Dan's dog. Mike's dog. And they were gone, and he locked himself out of their place, so he climbed in through their backyard, and he fell through their plate glass window door. Fell through it. He fell on the ground. Now imagine in a movie, the door is completely shattered, but there's a huge chunk, like a triangular chunk of glass that's teetering on the top of the door. It broke, and it fell into his back and punctured his lung.
Oh, shit.
Terry Notary, the movement coach, I watched him in a bar. He used to be in Cirque du Soleil, and he's worked on Avatar, and he's worked as a movement coach on all these major films. Yeah. He was sitting at this bar, and he was totally drunk, and he lost his footing, but he held himself, because he's a Cirque du Soleil guy, he held himself like up by the side of the bar, but he slid backwards, like he couldn't gain traction, so he's falling backwards, and his feet underneath him so he can stop from falling backwards. He slides all the way down the bar, flies off the bar, and smashes into a bar table where like 4 people were sitting, and it exploded like a bowling alley of bowling pins, just wham! And he flies back and smashes into the wall and cut his head open. I was like, they're going to blame me for this because I'd already been mugged. And then they started blaming everybody who had any kind of mishap. Now, I was coming back from a club. Kate Bosworth was having a little party at this club called Lucky 7, which was 3 blocks away from my apartment. And I could see it from where I was walking. I was just walking up William Street, talking to, at the time, my wife on the phone. And I wasn't even paying attention. These 4 guys, one of them did a roundhouse kick in my face. The phone went sprawling, but it stayed connected, so my wife heard me get beat up. And then I just got Clockwork Orange, man. They drew.
I was listening to the show and it was talking about what had happened to Adam, and then it mentioned you and actually said, yeah, Robert Burnett was mugged while walking home, and I thought, oh my God, is he all right? I better call him. Oh no, wait, this was 7 years ago. Never mind. Let's actually talk about this movie. Let's talk about the individual sequences. Let's finally get to the actual movie as it plays out. That might be a good thing to do. But of course we have to start by talking about what's not in the movie. As Robert says, the Return to Krypton sequence was not included in the movie, whether Brian wanted it or not. We finally at least got a chance to see it, so we've got a bit of perspective on this. Now, I guess we just need to make the argument for its inclusion, or say, no, absolutely, we needed to start the movie with a bang, we needed to lose it. I understand completely, because of the lack of the music, the sequence has no pulse and no pace. It would be like, people make fun of, seeing the Enterprise in its dry dock for 5 minutes in Star Trek The Motion Picture, but you have the music, and it's the music that makes it work, that makes it beautiful, in my opinion. If you were watching that sequence with no music, which is your experience watching Return to Krypton, I think you'd have a very different reaction. I can make the argument for the inclusion of the sequence because of the resonance it's supposed to have later on in the film, when that horrible sick joke, that graveyard, is brought to life by Lex, an old man sick joke. In fact, just to really hammer it home, you can tell there are shots when Lex's helicopter is flying over New Krypton that seem to be mirroring exactly the shots when Superman's spaceship is flying over old Krypton. It's right there. It's enough to even make me forgive that Lex's plan makes no sense. I love the payback on Supes. There's no better way to get payback on that guy that you are quite rightly very, very pissed off with. So I think if it was scored, I can make the argument for its inclusion. I like it a lot, but who disagrees with me?
I think with performance, with good actors, they were able to sell, again, he says that in the movie, that place was a graveyard. I had to see it for myself. I thought that carried more weight, him saying that, and then we see the final version, and I understand this thing about telling, don't tell me something, show me. And I usually agree with that, but seeing the scene finally, and I agree, it's like having heard about the scene for years and years and years, I wanted to see it. I finally did, and I just thank God it didn't open that way. Brian has his reasons for not wanting to include it. I don't care for it. It's his right as an artist to not want to include it if he doesn't want to. My feeling is always, if you shot the material, if there's a demand, you should at least show it as a supplementary feature. And I'm glad, at least for fans, that we finally got to see the sequence.
I would have been fine with them including it just because it's better than a black card with white text.
Black card was better, dude. Sorry.
No.
I don't understand why you think it's slow. It's so majestic and it's so sad, and you're seeing this entire beautiful advanced culture. The great thing about it is it's a great way to remind everybody that Superman's alone in the universe, and at the same time, you get the idea that this culture has been brought to its knees, and it's so sad, and it's
because
so.
I thought they already got across that he's alone in the world by the scene with, again at the home and other moments, they already.
Yeah, but if the movie opened that way,
then it sort of cancels itself out, though. It's I already have that information because of the opening, so it's
But you don't know what he feels about it. You don't know. You see it. By seeing his eyes, you see him looking and seeing all this, and he almost dies up there. He almost dies by being exposed to the only kryptonite in the universe originates from, and it's a hugely, I think it's a hugely moving sequence, and he barely gets out of there with his life, and gets back to Earth, and when he finally says that to his mother, that place is a graveyard, it's chilling.
Let's finally get to Lex's plots, and more importantly, crystals. Now, we've been talking before about the crazy continuity of keeping track of these Kryptonian crystals, specifically the green ones, which, as Justin pointed out last time, and it never even occurred to me, I feel like such an idiot, it's not really making sense for it to be green. But anyway, it's green and they keep showing up for some reason. But I love what Singer does in this movie with the concept of crystals. I actually think it's kind of cheeky. As we discussed, the technology of Superman the movie and how it all works was always up for debate. It felt more like magic with no logic behind it, and that's fine. But Singer has to do what Singer always does. Justify things. If it's there has to be a reason why it works. So it seems like Singer is basically saying that the heart of Kryptonian technology, the foundation of its society, was built on crystals, that it's this organic, self-replicating technology, and that you can create a world starting with just one of them. And it is a cheeky way of explaining away the continuity problem with the original movies. Yeah, you lost that green crystal, oh, there's another one. You could just say, oh, it just keeps growing. Just keeps growing in that ship, why not? There was one in Superman's ship, just one made the fortress, and Singer takes that idea and runs with it and says, well, why couldn't you make something bigger than that? Why couldn't you make a whole city or a continent?
Yeah, I thought actually the crystal idea, just in general, like the concept of it was really cool, and using them to make some uninhabitable land, just to call back to the first movie again, is pretty pointless, but with a little imagination, I think something visually interesting and really unique could have been done to expand on the Donner universe using the crystals. And then the kryptonite just kind of gets a little bit more hacky. But the idea of like expanding on the technology from the crystals and kind of programming things and building spaceships and cool stuff, kind of expanding on the imagination of the crystal technology, I thought was pretty awesome and could have lent itself to future stories, or possibly maybe even villains who look like they have crystals coming out of their bodies, like Doomsday or something like that. But it felt like there was promise that wasn't really reached with the whole idea.
The whole real estate thing, I always thought that was sort of like, we see the rest of the movie, Lex is kind of, I don't know, how should I put this, but it wasn't really about real estate. Everyone keeps falling back on like, oh, it's a real estate plan. No, his whole plan was fucking over Superman. He wanted the biggest way he could wave the middle finger to him. And I love the use of the crystals. I actually thought the use of the kryptonite was actually really well done too. And again, he says in the movie, you took away 5 years of my life, I'm returning the favor. It's like, I'm going to create this world, this entire continent, and you're not going to be able to do a damn thing. The moment he hits that land, he's fucked, and he doesn't even realize it. And of course, it leads to like the most harrowing sequence of the movie is when they beat the crap out of him and they gut him with a basically like an ice. I mean, what was that? I mean, he basically sharpened a piece of kryptonite into a knife.
It was a shank.
Yeah, shank. Thank you.
It's a crypto shank.
It was the sharp piece of metal in his pocket that he was talking about that he needed in prison. So I think
that's
there's a lot there.
That's right. Yeah, there's some good quippy dialogue in here, by the way. Yeah, that's right. But yeah, I mean, that didn't bother me. It wasn't really about the real estate. I mean, it's just like, I think they're harping on to that one a little bit too much.
If you're taking the movie at face value, though, that's flat out what he says. And people say so little throughout the movie that we can't help but just cling on to anything that they give us. And the first thing he says is explains his plot. And so even if he's using it as a ruse, which he's not because we know the character, he actually believes in these bullshit real estate plans. Whether or not they make sense, that these are his megalomaniacal ideas. We know this to be a truth in the character. This is not just speculation. They flat out said it. They're expanding on the original movie, which they're clearly doing throughout the entire thing. And yes, there is a poetry to it that expands beyond the simple plot. But if they had just said that, then that would have been pretty cool. But they don't. They explain it away as a real estate plot, and it's a shitty plot. It's a bad idea. It doesn't make any sense, especially for a genius.
Man, if it was about the money, then why do you have the Gertrude stuff? It's like this guy can easily
This is speculation.
He can easily get money.
It's speculation. I'm saying you take the movie at face value. They lay down the groundwork for this and the justification for the character. Like I said, I'm not saying that what you're saying about the drama here is good, but they flat out tell us that this is his plan, and he says it, and what am I supposed to do? Just say that Bryan Singer's a liar and that he mischaracterized Luthor? No, he did that, and it's a mistake, and there are good ideas here, but it just doesn't lead to a fulfilling, cohesive whole.
Well, I think that what I always thought was sort of a missed opportunity is that clearly he's fusing this Kryptonian crystal with kryptonite, you know, and I always thought that if the continent was going to rise, it would rise a la Dr. Manhattan's clockwork spaceship in Watchmen that he drags out of the Martian. This beautiful citadel, this city that he's programmed not just to build a continent, but he's building this impossibly intricate city. This city that's made out of crystals and kryptonite. That's deadly to Superman, but it's magical and it's incredible, and it's this amazingly beautiful place. You know, that's like the Sistine Chapel, and it's like every beautiful building ever constructed on this bedrock of this fusion of, and it would have been a wondrous place to behold that he would have been the master of, and it would have represented what Krypton was at the height of its power, yet to step into it for Superman would be deadly. And that's what Luthor was really recreating, was this amazing culture that had been destroyed.
And I agree with that. I mean, don't forget, if we're going by Robert's arguments that, Superman 2 is part of the continuity, remember how Lex felt when he first stepped inside the fortress? How in awe he was? How he was like, it's fantastic! And he just immediately thought, oh, I've got plans here, and he just never got to pull it off. And also, Jamie, look, don't forget the line that he has. Well, first of all, I do love the line now, in retrospect, where he says, do you know the story of Prometheus? Because that has a whole different meaning since that movie came out. Because I'd say,
I know.
I'm right with you, Kitty. I'm still trying to figure that movie out. But he says the line, I want to bring fire to the people, and I want my core. It don't get no clearer than that, Jamie.
Oh, he's going to make money off of it. I mean, he's
but you're
going
saying
to
he's
find
not.
a way.
You're saying it's nothing to do with that. It's all about fighting Superman.
His ultimate goal, the whole point was, it didn't matter. He just wanted to fuck over Superman. If he can make some money off it, fine. That's what it comes down to. Again, he says that you took 5 years away from my life. I'm just going to return the favor to you. That's what this whole thing was about.
No, he didn't know Superman was coming back when he started his plot. He was swindling Gertrude out of her money, thinking he was going to go right to the Fortress of Solitude and steal that power, not knowing that Superman was going to return.
Oh. Wasn't that cut out where he knew he was going to, he actually set up that,
Well, no, he set up Superman to leave and never thought he'd see him again.
Because, Krypton's made of kryptonite, so he thought he was kind of killing him. Now I'm thinking about it, it's a really dumb fucking idea going there, really, but...
Kal Penn's character sent him there.
Oh, that's right, that was his character, Sanford.
Yeah.
Kind of important information there that we don't get to hear about. Justin.
No, there was he had a lot of dialogue, and all of it was cut out of the movie, which again, I never really understood.
If Luthor wasn't trying to give a big F you to Superman, he wouldn't have put the cylinder of kryptonite around it when he made the continent. I mean, he specifically laced that entire continent with kryptonite to F Superman over, but yeah, I mean, Rob is totally right that this thing, the plan was get rid of Superman and then do this thing. So, I don't know that it was, I mean, yes, he was trying to screw Superman, but the way he was trying to do that was to just send him away out into the universe forever, not necessarily to do...
Well, that's the thing, though. It's like, well, if it was just like, oh, Superman's never come back, then why put the kryptonite there? It's like you're putting that as an insurance.
Well,
if you ever do come back,
Superman
guess what?
Back.
But
Superman
part
had
of the
returned
plan
by the time he made that choice. No.
That
became part of the plan after Superman showed back up.
Yeah, they get the
plan was grow the continent, and oh shit, Superman's back. We need kryptonite, so they went off to that museum. They got that kryptonite, and they did their thing.
Look, guys, it boils down to this, whether you like it or not, Jamie. It boils down to this. Any great villain, and I believe Lex in this movie is a great villain, we have villains that have revenge plots, but if they're a great villain, they're intelligent enough to actually have ambitions beyond that. They have long-term goals. That's why, if we want to go back to the old pain reliever of Khan, that's what made Khan so great. He had long-term goals. Yes, he was going to get rid of Kirk. Yes, that was consuming all his other ambitions, but he wanted Genesis too. He was going to do things with Genesis after he got rid of Kirk. He had other ambitions. It's the same thing with Lex. Yeah, I'm going to get rid of Superman no matter what, no matter how. Okay, he's back. Fine, I'll deal with it. It's what I do. I'm smarter than he is. But yeah, he had other goals. He was bringing fire to the people. Of all the things to have a debate about, I thought this was the one we were all going to agree on. It shows what I fucking know. I thought this was so clear cut. He says it. What's the problem? Why are you not getting this, Jamie?
I'm just saying, I mean, no, again, like, you know, he ultimately wants to fuck over Superman. He says it in the movie. That's also pretty clear.
It's clear. I'm just saying he's doing both. You're saying it was all about getting revenge on Superman.
It's mostly about fucking over Superman, yeah.
Oh, it's mostly now.
Both things.
No, it is.
Both
I mean,
things happen on screen, though. We saw them happen. You can't discount that. All I'm saying is that all these things happened on screen. We saw them, so I don't know what else we're supposed to think.
We're supposed to think whatever Jamie tells us to think, Randall.
I'm just telling you, yeah. Well, you're kind of filling in the blanks there, but it's all right, you know.
We're filling in far fewer blanks than you are.
Oh. Okie dokie. Well, we've got that out of the way. Bloody hell. Let's move on. Lex himself, I have to say, even though the character isn't portrayed in the movie as I thought it was going to be, that still doesn't stop the fact that I think every scene with him in is just delightful. And you know why? Because every scene with him has purpose and function. You know, every scene tells us something about him. It's pure, it's storytelling at its best. You know, the opening scene of the movie, when Lex swindles Noelle Neal out of all her money on her deathbed. It's a wonderful scene. If we are going into this and we haven't seen a Superman movie before, the audience knows about this character. They know everything they need to know. We're establishing Lex, we're establishing that he's bad news, and we're establishing a threat right from frame one. I mean, I think that's great. I just wish
he
the
was
rest...
boned like a 90-year-old woman.
Yeah! I know some people think
showed
that...
me pleasures that you promised me you would. Mm-hmm.
And again, I mean, I didn't mean to be really hard on Mike and Dan because they wrote all of these wonderful scenes, and I really... Mike's sardonic sense of humor comes through with one dog eating the other, and and the rocks falling down as we talked about. And that scene in the original cut was a little bit longer. And it played really, really well. It was really creepy because you don't see Kevin Spacey's face until the very end when he's revealed to all of the relatives. And I also love how Parker Posey is a maid. You know, she's undercover in the house, and he's playing the long con with her. He's been involved with her. She got him out of prison, and I loved all of what was going on there, and also. Tonally, that's in a whole different movie. I mean, that's it's just like that scene is from a whole. It's like you're coming into a whole different film, and then things shift. You know, once he gets his hands on that yacht that you see, then it changes. But can you imagine the prison visits they had? And there's a whole nother movie about the long con he's playing, swindling Noelle Neal's money from her.
But I just think it's not just that scene, of course. It's just every scene where he knows what he's doing. I'm not going to get into the debate about it again, but he has a plan, but he's also able to improvise when the plan changes and goose things. And also, I don't know if you ever felt this, but I noticed it especially in that scene on the boat with Kitty when he says, I want to bring fire to the people. It is scary to me how much Spacey looks like Rosenbaum. Am I the only one who thinks this? Especially like the line when he says gods are selfish beings. It was spookily similar to like the scene in the finale of Smallville when Rosenbaum chides Clark for not embracing his powers. You know, when he said, you hid from it, I would have used it. To me, it was just like a mirror. Maybe they just had the same shaped head, I don't know, but it looks like older Rosenbaum to me. It really does.
I love how sadistic his Lex is, though. I mean, that's just the thing. It's like, he's dangerous. And all of us here love Gene Hackman's take on the character, but it's sort of, there's still moments where it's Gene Hackman kind of being lovable a little bit, you know? And there ain't no lovability here.
That's what I like. We talked about this a little bit earlier, is that he's clearly, to me, playing Hackman's Luthor. It's the same character.
Right.
But it's like this crazy sociopathic version of it. It's not the huggable Gene Hackman playing a villain version. It's like, I mean, it's that guy, but he will cut you. Like, I don't know, it's a much more scary, darker version of that same character, but still very clearly that character. He wears, the ridiculous wigs and the costumes, like, you don't maybe notice him at first, but when he's on the boat in that scene you were talking about, the Prometheus scene, like, he's got these jack boots on with his pants tucked into him, and you're like, what are you wearing? This people don't wear this. Like, cartoon characters wear this, but he's still dangerous and scary, and I thought it was really cool. Probably my favorite part of the movie, actually, is Spacey's Luthor.
Well, I mean, I think part of that might be the fact that, like, I think even back in the Burton version, isn't that who we all wanted to play the part? It wasn't he rumored to be playing?
He was the only guy talked about for years. I mean, that was... I mean,
he was by far the fan favorite on Blue Tights.
He was the favorite everywhere. I mean, I remember they used to do those old... Randall remembers Wizard magazine casting calls, and, Spacey was the guy they picked for Lex every time.
That's not true, Jamie. That is not true. I distinctly remember one of those Visit articles, and they picked Billy Zane. I'm not even joking.
Oh my God, they did?
Because he had a bald head at the time, yeah. They
went on look. You've proven me wrong like that, you son of a bitch.
The first time I met Brian, we had that conversation about how anytime someone shows up with a bald head, everybody immediately goes, oh, they should play Lex Luthor. And it's just like, guys, we can shave anybody's head. Like, get the right actor.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask you, Robert, actually, that even though they don't get any lines, I think Singer does try his best to actually make, well, at least one of Lex's henchmen memorable.
All of the guys playing the henchmen were great. And they've all got, they all had much more to do in the final version. And I really do miss all of that because they had such great faces and they had a lot more to do. And I do miss all that from the film.
I do love that. I mean, we do have one moment, which is the guy who gets hit by the piano. It's like, you'll have to tell me, it almost feels improvised to me that you have the guy, it's just a wonderful moment where, hey, I can play the piano too, watch me. And he has the tattoo, which is almost animated, of the dog's head on the back of his head, and then he gets hit.
Dog's head.
Is it not a dog's head? What is it?
It's a clown.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, clown posse.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's a clown's head. Yeah, and
which I always thought that was an allusion back to the comment that Jamie said in the chat here earlier in the movie, in The Planet. He makes the comment about the Birthday Clown Massacre, and then later on you see this Stone Cold Killer with a clown tattooed on the back of his head.
Yeah. No, absolutely. All of that stuff. There's so much that went into the film that I don't think is representative. It's not represented well by the finished movie. I mean, everything from the set design to there was so much. I mean, one of the things that I can't stress enough is the craftsmanship and the care and the love that went into making the film. I saw everybody working at the top of their game on a daily basis, and everybody was, working at 100%, and it's difficult for me to watch the movie because it seems like the Reader's Digest condensed version of what I saw made in Australia. And that's true of a lot of movies. You could say that, a lot of things get lost on the way, but this was, everything about it was so first rate. I mean, it was never was anything skimped on, and it was just all so handsomely mounted and so well done.
Well, the thing is, the Daily Planet looked like a real newspaper. I mean, it's like, it kind of was, it's funny because we talk about Superman the movie, and Robert was on talking about it, and it's like, that was the New York Times. I mean, that was, I don't know if they didn't shoot that there, but they were recreating the interiors of the New York Times, and that felt like a real place that had been there for 100 years, that was still delivering the news. That was the most important place in the world for your news. Like, that just looked, that was like, that's how you update the Daily Planet. Like, that looks great.
But I was going to ask a question about that, Robert, because you were talking to me about how in Superman the movie, you know, they don't make any bones about it. Metropolis is New York, so they shoot in New York. It has that New York energy. The offices of the Daily Planet in that movie, they're not flashy in any way. They're not Art Deco. It's just a modern newsroom, well, 70s modern newsroom. And in this movie, I totally get that they're reinventing the offices, and I get that they're not trying to replicate exactly the way that the Daily Planet scenes were shot in Superman the movie, because now you have the Spider-Man movies and you don't want to be compared to them. I'm guessing that's the theory there. But yeah, I was always curious, considering how obviously it's trying to replicate in a lot of ways the magic of Superman the movie. Why didn't they shoot in New York? Why doesn't it have that New York energy? This doesn't feel like New York City to me. This does feel like its own place, like it is Metropolis, like it's a completely other place.
Well, I think that was, you know, I think Brian was looking towards, because New York is very of today. Billboards would be immediately dating the film. And they sort of created this phantasmagoria of this Art Deco design from the Fleischer cartoons to to create this 40s vibe by way of today, and using all the periods of 20th century Americana. And I think that they wanted to heighten it a little bit, but still make it redolent of the time. Whereas, if you look at the Daily Planet back then, it's fluorescent lighting. It's not that interesting. The story of Superman is the story of 20th century America. You know, it really is, because he was, after all, an immigrant, and he was created by immigrants. And there's an element of that in all of Superman's stories. I mean, Superman is as much American. If there's any such thing, I mean, Captain America is obviously American because he's called Captain America, but Superman embodies what America really is, which is people coming from disparate places and creating the tapestry of what America is now. And that's what Superman is. He's the ultimate immigrant, and adopting America as his homeland. And I think that there's an element there that Brian was very aware of, that he was trying to inject into the movie.
In contrast, actually, I thought that the production design really took me out of the movie a lot. It was really weird because, like, all the disparate sort of art direction that was going on in the movie, from like the Art Deco to like the the establishing shots were all New York, with the Daily Planet superimposed in them, and then we had like the face of the building, which was, I'm sorry, like it was impressive, but it was clearly like a soundstage to me watching the movie. So a lot of the stuff felt like it was all I don't mean to sound too derisive, it's just that it was registering as fake to me when I was watching the movie. So I didn't get that sense of like the extension of the Donner universe where we felt like we were in a real city with real locations. It was really overly stylized to the point where I just kept feeling like this was a cartoon. Like it lowered the sort of reality and the stakes of the whole thing for me, because it was like I just couldn't connect with it as being a real thing. There were some set pieces that were really impressive, like the Krypton soundstage, the island, the Crystal Island thing was like one soundstage with some green screen on it, which was, I think, showed up really well on screen. Like, I didn't even call that when I first saw it. It looked like this huge set.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was. It was.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was an enormous set. That was one of the few we got to see on the visit, and it was a full hangar of that thing. It was. But to your point, I just do want to throw in. Jamie and I talked about that right before the cast. That one of the worst kind of things about the film is that everything feels like it's on a soundstage. Like, yeah. Everything feels indoors, even most of the outdoor shots, like the roof of the Daily Planet, and it just, you very much feel like you're on a stage for most of it. It feels claustrophobic and not, I mean, it goes back to the earlier conversation Rob said about the scope of it. The scope feels so much smaller because you do feel indoors all the time.
So, it's obviously about time that we got into performances, and let's talk about the man himself. Now, I think in the case of Brandon Routh, we have a very unique situation in that when you have actors coming in to not only do a new interpretation or an old interpretation on a classic character, a classic piece of American cinema at this point. It's going to be a natural side effect that they're going to be compared to the old model, as it were. But in the case of Brandon Routh, you also have the unique element that they have been specifically cast to emulate the person that they are replacing. And at the same time, the movie seems to... It wants to be Donner in some ways, but as we've discussed, it doesn't want to be Donner in a complete way, and eventually it does turn into its own thing. So the question is, are we meant to think of this as the new Christopher Reeve or not? Are we initially meant to think of that, and are we meant to just judge his performance by his own merits eventually, or... Brandon's just in a really tricky spot. I think as Superman, I think he does a great job. I think as Clark, he does even better. I can't get enough of Routh as Clark. I just don't think we get enough of it. And that's probably just because it is emulating Superman the movie, and the fact that in Superman the movie, once Clark hears about Lex's plot and jumps out of the window, we never see Clark again in that movie. It's the same in Superman Returns. The moment he finds out where Lois's boat is, he goes in the elevator, changes, and we never see Clark again. And I always felt that myself, you always had to treat Clark and Superman as two different characters in that regard, that they should ideally both get a last scene, preferably with Lois, but we don't get it in that movie, and that's a shame. And I think everyone's just going to agree that the main regrettable point about not getting a sequel is that we didn't get more of him.
Here's how I feel about Brandon's performance as Clark. I think Brandon is more of who the character truly is while he's being Clark, when the absolute reverse was true of Christopher Reeve, where you see the emotion that's running through him as Clark when he's discovering Lois's relationship with Richard White, and you can see that he's pained, and when he's trying to talk to Lois, and when Lois is telling him, like on the steps of the Daily Planet, did you ever have one of those experiences where somebody told you something and it wasn't true? And Clark is clearly more of the person that we're watching than his Superman is. Because in Superman the movie, Christopher Reeve is Superman. He's clearly, his Clark Kent is an affectation. Is bumbling, oh, well, Lois, and it's, when he's Superman, he's the man. I mean, there's no question Christopher Reeve's Superman is Superman. But I think Brandon Routh's Superman is almost the disguise. His Clark is more who he really is.
I actually am a little dictate a little bit differently. I actually prefer to Superman to his Clark Kent because we didn't get... it's funny. How should I put this? It's probably for the first time I felt like Clark Kent was a genuine disguise. You see Superman in the movie and you feel like Clark and Superman are two different personas, and there's those little moments like when he starts to, he's about to tell Lois and he starts to kind of, he starts to pick himself up and he's getting all cocky and he realizes he can't tell her. That's when you see the split. It does, I don't know, I could see Superman underneath his Clark Kent disguise, though. I actually love his Superman more. He's got a real warmth and sincerity to him, though. I don't know, my favorite moment of his Superman in terms of it's two moments. One is, I think it sort of sells him the best is when he's saving Kitty. The entire interaction, but particularly when she's like, oh, my chest palpitations, they've stopped, what have you done? And, he says, I haven't done anything, and he's about to fly away, and she says, oh, well, you have places to go, people to save, and he just very nicely smiles and goes, yes. I just thought, like, that's Superman. And, actually, the real moment of the whole movie for me is the ending, and we'll get to it in a few minutes, but, like, when he sits there and realizes that that's his child, like, he has this sincerity that, I have to have this look to him that, honestly, it just about moved me to tears, and I saw it in the theater, because my niece was about a year and a half at this point when the movie came out. And I had seen my sister and brother-in-law give that look, just seeing her sleep. And I'm sure I gave that look. And I don't know, it was something about that really moved me. And I thought to myself, Christopher Reeve would have killed for this role. Like, he would have loved to have had this to have done this in a Superman movie. And Routh got that. I don't even see the similarity of the look. Everyone says, "Oh, he looks just like Chris Reeve." I don't see it.
I agree. I think he's obviously chosen because of their vague similarities, and he's supposed to be playing the same. He's supposed to be playing an extension of the Reeve character, so like that can't be ignored. But I don't think he's going out of his way to be exactly like Reeve. I think they're letting him. I think the spirit of that character is there, but I don't think they're trying to imitate it specifically. But I actually really liked Routh a lot. I don't have anything really bad to say about him, especially because this is like one of his earliest efforts. I mean, he was in some other stuff, but you know, he's featured in like a movie, and he carries it okay for what he's given. He's not really given a great deal to do, but he plays the moody stuff pretty well, and he's you know, supposed to be, you know, moody and stuff, and that works. And this isn't a dig, but he does great with the big emotions, like the really big obvious stuff. Like when there's a great scene when he goes to the fortress and he realizes that there are some crystals missing.
Yeah.
And he has to he gets really clearly very upset about that, as anyone would. He plays it really well, and the whole scene is done without dialogue, and I think it's one of the strongest scenes in the movie because it just lets the audience really like feel the scene, and Routh just kind of ushers us through it.
I do like his Superman more than his Clark, I think. But one of the things that's always bugged me about the whole Routh situation, I mean, you're right, he was cast because of a lot of similarities to Chris Reeve. He's not copying him outright, but there's a lot of ways that Routh says things that his enunciation is like Chris, and even to some points the tone of his voice is like Chris. And that's obvious. That's there, right? I mean, that's a big part of why he was cast. In fact, when he was cast, I went back and watched the one episode of Cold Case that he was in. It's like the only thing he had done previously. And in the episode of Cold Case, actually, he was even freakishly Chris Reeve-like. Like, his performance in that, man, I mean, most of the scenes, he just outright seemed like Chris. It was a little weird. And he especially sounded like Chris. It was eerie, in fact, the first time I saw it. And he didn't channel it as much in the film as he did in the Cold Case episode, which I found interesting. But one of the things, and I don't know if Rob would agree with me after having met him, but I got the opportunity with working on everything to spend time with Routh on multiple occasions. I hung out and talked with him at various events and on the set, and so I was with him a lot, at least enough, I think, that I'm 6'2". I'm a tall guy, and Routh is 6'2", maybe 6'3" at the most. I mean, he's not much taller than me. But what I found when I was with him in person, I felt like a little kid. He has, like, I get why Bryan Singer sat across a table from this guy and was like, this is him. Like, he has this big Superman presence, not threatening, just he feels big. Like, he feels Superman-like when you're standing next to him. And like I said, I'm a tall guy. It takes a lot to make me feel small. And yes, I am bromancing a little bit there, but it just, I was always a little bit disappointed that it didn't quite all kind of make it onto the screen, and I don't know why. I don't know if it was the suit or what it was, but something didn't quite make it all the way, and I felt like in person he had every bit the presence of the character as Reeve did in the films, but I didn't feel like in the actual Superman Returns movie he quite hit that same note.
Well, I think obviously even people who don't like the movie, and I think Randall's kind of proven the point there, had no problem with Routh. I mean, he was agreed by pretty much everybody as a bright spot of the movie. Kate Bosworth, not so lucky. And it seems to be a subjective thing here. I mean, personally, you either accept the fact that she works or she doesn't. She clearly is a younger girl playing an older part. To be honest with you, I like her in the part a lot. I think one of the reasons is that I think the part is rather well written. I mean, the core of Lois, to me, is that she'll always find the story. And all throughout the movie, while everybody else is so distracted by Superman returning, we keep coming back to Lois, as in, even though she's using it as an excuse to avoid the issue, she still is saying, look, we need to keep on this blackout thing. Something is wrong here. She knows to trust her instincts and keep on the story, and you know, it leads her into trouble, of course, and that's exactly what a classic Superman story should be. So I've never really understood what people's problem is, whether it's just with Lois herself and the fact that the character is moving on in a way that we've not seen before, or whether it's Bosworth's performance, but I hope somebody's got a theory on this. Robert?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I thought her performance was terrific. I mean, I really did. I think that the problem that people have with her is she just looks so young. Yep. And she's also coming off of, all we know of Kate Bosworth really began with things like Blue Crush. And, you know, we see her as barely out of her teens, and there's no way you can suspend. I mean, Margot Kidder seems like her mom. Especially in Superman 2, where she smoked 100 million cigarettes. But, I mean, it's Kate,
Don't remind me.
Kate, I have to tell you, I mean, I watched Kate Bosworth, and I was always, first of all, I adored her as a person. And she was just, both Brandon and Kate worked really, really hard, and Jimmy Marsden for that matter. But I think that, you know, Kate is a very slight actress. You know, she's very tiny and she's very petite. And, I just don't think that she was just too young for the role. But I thought, as far as acting, she was great, but she still comes off as being not a 30-year-old mother. People just didn't believe that it's supposed to be 5 years after, you know, her kid is 5 years old, so you needed an actress that's 31, 32, 33, that's believably 31, 32, or 33. And I think Kate Bosworth was, 23 when she did the role?
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, if they'd casted a more seasoned actress, the only problem with that is she probably would have eaten Brandon Routh alive, because he comes off as, like, really young and fresh-faced in the movie. So, like, they try to get somebody who's younger than him, or someone as youthful as him, and we get somebody who is selling the seniority of the character and the wit of the character in some scenes, but her look is really betraying her in a lot of ways, because she looks so incredibly young. And we also, like Rob was saying, I mean, we're not really seeing like a really definitive Lois Lane. We're seeing like a whole new kind of take on the character. And honestly, it's pretty off-putting, just because it's like, I don't really need to see a character this pissed off and belligerent for 2 hours, even though I understand why. I understand what's going on. You know, that's not necessarily that entertaining. It's a little bit taxing on the audience. And I think overall she was miscast, but I don't think she did a bad job.
One of the problems that I do have, and it's a problem with the script, and also it's a problem with me, because we're talking about, again, going back to, what is this movie really a sequel to? Is it a sequel to 1 and 2, or just 1, or maybe loosely all of them? How far has the relationship between Lois and Clark gone? Because it seems to me, in this movie, with the exception of the hello hug that they give each other, Lois seems to have really no affection for Clark. Certainly not to the level that we saw in the other films. She treats him like a casual acquaintance, and yet, to me, they were proper friends, even by the end of the first film. And they barely have any scenes together in this that demonstrate that. And I think we've got to ask the question, in this movie, does she know who he is? Look, the continuity for fans of the films is confusing as it is, and we could do with some spelling out some stuff. She obviously chastises Superman in front of Clark, the fact that he took off, but it seems obviously kind of directed at Clark. Clark wants to talk when they're alone at the planet at night, just before she goes up to the rooftop, and she takes off, and she almost swears when she drops all of her stuff, so it's like, oh god, why did I have to drop it here, because I really don't want to talk to you right now, I have to go. And is there something to read between the lines here?
No, I mean, look, I think one of the great missteps of the film is that this stuff needed to absolutely be explained. And you just don't know, like, how much of Superman 2 is correct. Because if it is, and that's the only time they copulated, she absolutely would know who Clark is.
Here's the weird thing to me, like, if Superman 2 is still part of the story, this is a continuation of that. So the whole memory kiss thing still happens. And that's something that's never made sense to fans to begin with, but let's just go with it anyway. So, Superman and Clark are completely linked in that movie. There's no, like, separating that story. Like, there'd be weird gaps in her memory if she remembered all the stuff with Superman but didn't remember Clark getting mixed up and all that. Like, that would probably make her even more suspicious of all this stuff. So I don't think that kiss was, like, super specific about the memories it took. I think it was just supposed to wipe the last, like, month or whatever the hell out of memory or whatever. But that's the logic kind of breaks down. But the point I'm getting at is, like, so I think based on this movie, we're supposed to believe that the kiss didn't work. So why did Clark think it would? Like, what was his plan there then? Because clearly Bryan Singer's kind of saying, "Hey, no, it didn't work." So what was his angle? Like did all the superpower swapping in the second movie like scramble Clark's brain, and that was his weird plan? Was like, I'll just kiss it away, and then she's like, what was that? And then and he's like, nope, nobody remembers anything now. And then like that's the end of the movie. Like that's really unclear to me. Like how all of that stuff transpired after the second movie. I'm left way more confused by that, by something that I thought would never be more confusing.
Well, the only thing I took from it was, I mean, wasn't Singer very much being very fast and loose? He was just sort of picking and choosing which continuities he wanted to acknowledge. I think I could have sworn he said that. Correct me on that, gentlemen.
He did. But the thing is, she did conceive a child with Superman, and that child was half superpowered. So the question then is, you need in your own mind to know, when did this happen? How did it happen? And how come she doesn't seem to know? Or if she does know, why doesn't she reveal it to the man that she's been involved in a relationship with for 5 years?
Well, see, I read into the movie as being that she knew that she doesn't remember Clark, obviously, but the relationship was with Superman. I mean, there's even lines in the movie that it's, oh, Chief, I've done Superman. Everyone kind of looks quietly. I've reported him. You know what I mean? I know. Stuff like that. Like, that's how I always took it.
How does that work?
Yeah, that's like, we can't read Bryan Singer's mind, man. He's got to tell us, he's got to give us something here. What are we supposed to do? We're just taking it at face value. It doesn't make any goddamn sense. And then we're people who already we remember those movies, and it still doesn't make sense. Imagine a general audience. Imagine a 10-year-old watching this movie. They can't track any of this stuff. This is crazy.
We have the same question as the audience that Lois has, which is the question of, oh shit, did we do it? Like, the impression I got was that Lois obviously knew that there was a romantic history between her and Superman. She remembers that, and that for some reason, whatever it happens to be, she has this feeling, this gut feeling that this might be Superman's kid, but she doesn't remember actually doing it with Superman. So it's this question of like, did this happen? Is this a thing? And part of
one of the greatest reporters in the world, who is known for getting.
I'm just saying that's what I got out of it, was she wasn't sure what went down, but she suspected. And then to me, the look on her face when that kid throws the piano is, oh fuck, I was right. Like, shit gets real when she sees that happen.
Knows, though, you can't.
Well, yes, she does on a certain level instinctively, but she doesn't remember the actual thing happening. So she's like, what the fuck? I know we did it, but I don't remember doing it. And this kid...
But that's even worse. It was like she was...
I agree. Well, no. I agree. I know. And part of it to me, I don't know if we talked about this when we were recording before, but part of it to me is the other issue of like, look, if he got her pregnant, she was in Richard's bed like within a couple of weeks. But like for her to get indignant about Superman leaving, but she was sleeping with somebody else pretty much immediately, it makes her really unsympathetic. Like, for Richard to even believe, which to me he clearly believes it's his kid, at least until Superman shows back up, he believes this is his kid. And for him to even believe that, the timeline's got to be relatively close. So it was always very weird to me, but like the impression I got, like I said, was outright that she suspected but didn't know until she saw the piano throw, and then she was like, oh, yep, that's crap.
Well, what I was going to ask you, Justin, actually, based on everything that we've been talking about, you told me a story, I think it was even a year ago, and I'd like you to tell it again, how when your board at Blue Tight initially found out about, the kid,
my God.
how everything split down the middle. Now, the question I just wanted to ask you to hypothesize, if you will, do you think it's because of all of these huge questions that we've now had to, basically dredge up that confuse us so much about the continuity? Or did you just feel like it was a matter of principle, you don't give Superman a kid, full stop? What do you think it was?
I mean, it leaked over at Superhero Hype first. Someone was like, they described the scene, the plane scene, which didn't in the final film play out the way it was originally described, but I could easily see the changes being made because they were minor differences. But the scene was originally that they were flying in the plane looking for Superman's body, and that the kid used his X-ray vision to look down through the floor of the plane and saw him down there. In the final film, he just peeks out the window and he's like, I saw Superman down there. And they're like, oh, okay, well, let's fucking turn the plane around because this meek little child just said that. I remember that's when everything got ugly. Like, it was awkward enough when the suit was revealed, but people were still willing to give it a chance. And then when the Superman's kid thing came out, you either wanted to murder Bryan Singer or you wanted to make love to him. And it was pretty well down the middle. And I remember that night even, Chris Lee, the executive producer, called me and was like, hey, so that leak. And I was like, yeah, if that's true, people are going to lose their shit over it. And he was even like, no, it's not true. It's Richard's kid. And it was funny because at the premiere, he walked up to me as soon as I walked out of the cinema hall. He walks up to me in the hallway and he goes, "Hey, look, I'm really sorry I had to lie to you." It was the first thing he said to me coming out of that theater was, "I'm really sorry I had to lie to you." But it was really funny. But it was just the bottom line. You don't do it. You don't give Superman a kid. And it's funny to me because everybody is over and over and over. All they say when they're talking about new Superman stuff is, give us something new. Please give us something new. We don't want the same old shit all the time. And then as soon as you try to give him something new, yes, this was a drastic, weird, different new thing. People are really talking about just Brainiac. But as soon as you try to do something new, everyone loses their minds. There's your Joker line. Right? Introduce a little chaos and everybody loses their minds. And that's what happened. Like, it was something new and different and everyone was like, oh my God, I don't even know what to do with this. Everything about me is wrong and different, and Superman is, this makes no sense, and out of wedlock, and oh my God, he's a, deadbeat dad. And it was just a mountain of speculation and trouble and a mess for half of the people. The other half were like, wow, okay, let's see where this goes. This could be something really interesting. And I actually really enjoyed it personally because it was the mirror kind of situation. It was the evolution, and one of the things I've always loved about DC was the legacies. Characters carry on, and there are sons and fathers. And you had this situation where Jor-El sent his son off to be raised by two mortals, and he didn't get to see his son grow up, and now Kal has the same situation, but he gets to be there. Kal's son is being raised by two mortals in the same way he was, and probably for the better, just like it was for him, but he gets to kind of be there for it, and that has all these interesting implications and complications, and to me it's an interesting thing to play with, especially given the mythological nature of DC Comics, that it's gods and monsters. It's not trailer park deadbeat dad, it's a god. Zeus had dozens of children with mortals, and it's that kind of a thing. It's the kind of story you would find in mythology, and I like that about it, despite how human and down to earth kind of a lot of the elements were. But you were either like I was, or you were just like, oh my God, Bryan Singer has ruined everything about the last 75 years of Superman. He's terrible. Burn everything he's ever done.
Okay, Phil and I have sort of talked about this before, but it's like when you talk about these franchises, actually we all know this, is what I call the directorial power movie. It's like, you make the first one and the director's kind of restrained, and then the first one's a big hit, and what do they do with the second one? Generally they tell the director, here's a blank check, do whatever. Print money, who gives a shit? I'm going to do whatever. And he's just left alone at his own devices. And I mean, the great comparison, pops up to my mind is Tim Burton on Batman. You know, you look at the first movie and he's being controlled every day by John Peters and Peter Guber, and in the second movie, he's just insane. I'm not saying Bryan Singer was insane, but like I'm saying is that power was on display when you look at this movie. It felt like the second movie that came first, if that makes any sense.
That's a great point.
As someone who loves the movie and has been defending it, and acknowledging the flaws and everything, he needed that producer saying, "We can't do that."
But remember, battling Superman with a child is not new. You know, it was a natural. I think. If you look at Superman 2, if Lois and Superman are going to be involved in a relationship, having a child, and there's that famous, I forget who wrote the essay, but there's the famous essay that was written by a science fiction writer about whether or not Superman could actually conceive with Lois.
Let's not forget how the show Lois and Clark ends before they cancelled it.
Yep.
Well, I don't think they explicitly say that it's their child. It ends on a kind of cliffhanger, but who are we frigging kidding? It is their child, and that's how the series is going to progress unless they retcon it. And maybe if that had got a 5th season, maybe we'd be all... I was going to say we'd all be more mellow to the idea, but let's be honest, we're talking about fans here, so that was never going to be the case. But...
Well, folks, it's time for you to get a little mellow as we take another commercial break. But we'll be right back with the home stretch, including the sequel